You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
The Centresteer Podcast, a Land Rover podcast by Land Rover owners. Welcome to the 29th edition of the Centresteer Podcast for August 2015. Our recording date, though, is the 6th of September 2015. You know, thanks to summer and holidays and vacation, if you're from America, we've basically had to delay a week in recording. But with me here in the studio is...
I'm Harold.
And via Skype...
I'm Morgan.
Welcome.
From Vermont.
Morgan from Vermont. And joining me in my hand is, because today's beer, thanks to friends of mine from Quebec, I'm having a St. Ambroise India Pale Ale. Highly recommended. If you get to Quebec City, I would highly recommend. These are excellent, excellent beers. So that's today's beer I'll be drinking during the podcast. So today on the show, we're going to have several segments, as we usually do, including our very first viewer mail. But it's not. I don't really want to call it viewer mail, but that's all I can think of.
Listener mail?
Listener mail. It's still... we received an email from a listener, Christian, and he will join us later on the podcast. He was asking for basically a consult on doing a conversion, and so Harold and Morgan will assist him because, my conversion skills are paying money. And
I'm calling me.
and calling you, writing the check. So later, Christian will join us, and we'll talk about conversion. We'll have a Heritage segment from Morgan, which is, what are we covering today on Heritage?
We are covering the Series Land Rover engine options and some of the upgrade options.
And today's M word is going to be, do you have a title yet?
I do, but I don't want to spoil it by mentioning it here.
Okay. You got to wait till we get there.
Yes.
Fair enough. All right. Well, then, first up, the news. JLR has reported some sales figures. We haven't talked about that in a while, but I think it's interesting, as always, to keep track of how things are selling for the brand. In July, JLR reported retail sales of 33,000 vehicles, which was down 3% from last year. That would be 2014. And during the first 7 months of 15, they sold 272,000 vehicles, which is 1% less than the same year. And we'll have a link to the article, of course. And they give breakdown of 19% growth in Europe, 16% in the UK, 14% growth in North America. Overseas overall, though, was down 11%, mainly because of China, which was down 28% year-to-date due to changing market conditions and production ramping up for the locally produced Range Rover Evoque. And
that happens fairly often in the industry during model year changes. The factories have to shut down to retool. But normally, that's their time to sell down their inventory of excess production. But if you're selling every one you can make, there is no excess inventory to draw down from. So you just don't sell as many right then because you can't make them.
And then for August, JLR reported sales figures for the U.S. alone, and that was a sales increase of 12% with 6,368 units. Land Rover was up 16% in August. Range Rover Evoque and Discovery Sport, of course, came in with the Evoque selling 1,430 units, which is up 36%. In comparison, sister brand Jaguar had sales decrease for the United States by 3% to 1,143 units. And it says here, leading the brand in August was the Jag F-Type with sales of 436 units, which was up 15% from August of 14. Little interesting joke that I saw in relation to this article was Jag's sales campaign is to sell more Land Rovers.
And that is no joke. I'm not a fan of Jag making SUVs, but...
I don't think any of us on the podcast are.
I guess it sells more Evoques, just ones with leapers on the hood.
Are they leapers or the cat? What's the difference? Right, there's one's the cat and one's the leaper, right?
Well, they're all cats.
Well, but the leaper is the one
that has the whole animal.
It's like a 3D one
in a leap, and the other one, which is the head of the cat, is called the growler.
The growler, that's the other one. That's the flat one that sits on the.
You of all people should be familiar with growlers.
Yes, you're right. It's the other kind of growler. It's the other growler.
Well, you need to get growlers with growlers on them, then you can make the association.
That would be cool. Oh, that would be very, very cool. Neat. So when is the the Jag SUV do? Do we know that? I didn't track that down enough ahead of time.
I don't know.
It's coming up.
It's soon. I've seen more and more pictures of it, and there's very little identity to it other than the fact that it's clear that it's a Range Rover Evoque.
That's all they did? There's no...
I mean, it's seriously badge engineered.
So it's like Buick Oldsmobile Chevy.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I hate to make that association, but yes.
Well, but that it sounds to me like Jag's having some issues, and they're not selling enough, and they figure if they sell an SUV like, Porsche did, Porsche, sells a ton of crap of those SUVs now, and make some money.
Yeah, Porsche's making SUVs and sedans, two things you never thought they were going to do.
Right. Speaking of production, JLR is moving closer to building a Slovakia plant. I think this would be the fourth plant outside of the UK. Nothing official. They've just signed a letter of intent. They're exploring their options, and it's believed that the plant would build the new Defender when that comes around. So that's I think there's a plant. Of course, they have one in China. There's one, I think, being built in Brazil. There's, of course, and there was what's the other one? There's another.
Well, there was the rumor about one in the U.S., but I think this Slovakia plant is the replacement for that one. This is the actual news for that rumor.
Was it the U.S. or was it Mexico?
Well, they were just sort of saying it was possibly U.S., possibly Mexico. They weren't sure, and now the letter of intent has been signed for Slovakia.
So that sort of kills that North American plant.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
The fourth plant, by the way, is in all places India, because they work in conjunction with Tata. So
imagine that.
Yes, and I did confirm it's the Brazilian plant is still under construction. So.
Nice.
And don't forget, there's the link with Magnasteer in Austria too, which is not Magnasteer, which is not an actual plant, but just a partnership.
Was some sort of joint venture, I believe. Was it to do Defender technology? Is that what it was?
We talked about it last month. I don't know that it was really defined. I think it's almost like an AMG kind of thing with Mercedes, where they're going to build their own versions of.
I'm drooling over the idea of the love child of the Defender and the Pinzgauer.
Interesting.
If you're not familiar with the Pinzgauer, think FC 101 with portal axles and 3 locking differentials from the factory.
Yeah, completely badass.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, nurse.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be,
I need some tissues.
Harold will be off. We'll take a pause, and Harold will come back. So that's production planning. Production plants coming up. Obviously, we've been keeping an eye on that. We'll continue to do that. Next is some general Range Rover news. The Autoblog Podcast, which is the Autoblog online website, which I watch and follow pretty much very constantly. They have a podcast, and episode 440, which was back in late July. I was a little behind again and listening to keeping up with the podcast. They did a review of the 2015 Range Rover Sport. They loved it, absolutely loved it. I recommend you go out and take at least to listen to the podcast, check it out. They had some nice things to say. So if you're trying to buy one, that might be the something to look into.
Honestly, I haven't seen too many negative reviews of that.
No, and they didn't. And this is the one, if I'm not mistaken, is like it's completely new frame, right? It's on the Range Rover, the main one frame. They got off of the Disco frame chassis, right?
I'm not sure, but you might be right.
Because I know they were switching over. I assume that I believe it was for the 2015 model year that they were switching to the new frame chassis.
Well, that would get rid of the number one criticism people have with the Range Rover Sport is that it isn't a true Range Rover because it's based on Discovery parts, which I always thought was a nice turnabout because the Discovery was based on the Range Rover Classic. So, what's shared parts among friends?
And it's all the same. Yeah,
It has its own identity. It has its own worth, if you will.
Right.
I mean, I've driven both the Disco 3 and the early Range Rover Sport, which was just a lot of people claim is just a skinned over Land Rover 3 or Disco 3, but they both have their strong points.
Yeah.
I would rather have the Disco off road, and I'd rather mall crawl in the Range Rover.
Yeah.
Especially when it has air suspension and really good air suspension and the supercharger.
Yes.
Which makes everything better.
Of course, when you say mall crawl, I obviously imagine Blues Brothers going through the mall, which would be, pretty nice in the Range Rover Sport.
Mall.
Nice and smooth and turbocharger. That would be great.
Oldsmobiles are out early this year.
Yeah.
Do we have a show title now? Superchargers make everything better?
Maybe.
Next, in Range Rover news, the Range Rover Sport, continuing on with that, looks like there's a facelift has been spied, and even though they just did it this year, a couple years ago, it looks like they're doing another facelift. Possibly, maybe, nothing clear yet, but maybe due out for mid-2016.
Yeah, it's interesting that they've really adopted the worldview of the short product life cycle.
What, 25 years isn't
25
short
years
enough now?
is not short enough, definitely.
Now, I haven't actually even looked at this. How much of a facelift is this? Is this more of like a minor nip and tuck, or?
I think so. If this picture, which is on worldcarfans.com, is any indication,
it's wearing some camouflage, so it's kind of hard to get a real good read on it.
Yeah, I mean, it has the sloping roof line in the back, the tapers down to indicate that it's a sport.
Yeah, the greenhouse looks very familiar. The front end looks a bit different, but again, I don't know how much of that is camouflage.
But I swear they change the front end every year. It seems like every year they always seem to change it lately.
It's easy to swap that stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Next is, and this just came out, I think, this past week, Land Rover was showcasing off more smart technology with their trailer tech. And it's a short little video they had where they take a camera and they put it onto the trailer, and then they make the trailer go away and make it invisible.
Another extension of their invisible bonnet technology?
Yeah, basically. So I believe that from a couple of the videos I looked at, it looked like it was actually merging the video from their normal rear-facing camera with the footage from the rear of the trailer, so that it really just sort of looked invisible.
So you're seeing what the trailer sees instead of what the back of the truck sees.
Actually, it looked like it was almost a combination of the two.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that you could see from the rear of the truck, but it looked like there was just no trailer there.
They make the trailer translucent and whatever's on the trailer translucent, like they did with the bonnet.
Okay.
Yep. But they have a couple other options too, like you can actually switch to, when you're reversing, you can switch to the actual trailer camera view, so you can see what you're reversing around and stuff like that. And then they have some like load balance sensors that can go in the trailer, so if you're towing a horse trailer and the horse gets unsettled, starts shaking things around, you can sort of monitor what's going on.
Or if you've loaded it unevenly, it could perhaps alert you before you blow a tire.
Absolutely. Exactly. They had a mat I think you would put down, and it would help you to balance the load.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, is that an air suspended trailer?
It's a good question, because they showed it with a couple of different trailers.
Because that would be an easy way to monitor the load variation. You could just monitor the pressure in the bag, and you could perhaps adjust for that somewhat as well.
It seemed like the way I think this was, they never talked about the trailer being a Land Rover trailer. It was always cameras, a pressure mat, and sensors.
As a retrofit for any trailer.
I would think, something you would probably add on.
So it wouldn't tie into the suspension then, okay.
It didn't seem like it.
Okay.
Of course, my question is, does the camera go through the standard electrical equipment? Is it Bluetooth connected? I'm wondering how how good's that going to connect? My guess is, I hope they wouldn't use Bluetooth, only because you want a good quality signal.
Well, you could do it using a data communication, just a couple wires in the module. The European trailer connector has a lot more pins to it than we're used to here, so there's perhaps a pin or two to spare.
Yep, and this is obviously just proof of concept, so I would imagine that, if they go forward with this, that it's going to be some kind of like dealer installed option where you bring in your trailer and they mount everything, and to make that the rear facing camera of the Land Rover and the rear facing camera from the trailer mesh seamlessly, you have to do some math there. So I'd imagine that they'd have to include some measurements and program stuff and adjust it. And
you'll probably have to pay $200 for the technician to turn on the used trailer vision feature.
Exactly.
Because they go and they go click.
Yet another profit center for the dealer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So look for more tech coming from Land Rover. They also, I didn't put this in the show notes, but they talked again about that pothole checker. you're driving down a road and it'll figure out there's a pothole ahead and get the suspension ready for a pothole. And I'm like, why? And I understand why, but as a person who's worried about the infrastructure of the country, any country, this does not help people say, "Oh yeah, my car's is driving like crap over your bad roads. Why don't you make the roads better?" But no, they'll look for potholes.
I'm just thinking, they could have taken the R&D money from developing the system and actually fixed some potholes.
yes, put it into the roads itself
as a community service.
Yes, help us all.
Or honestly, I don't know if either of you have seen this before, but it was at least a decade ago that Bose developed an electromagnetic suspension system that could actually respond faster than normal suspension. So it actually basically adjusts the height and response rate of the suspension.
That's Cadillac Magnasteer, isn't it? Because Cadillac uses a magnetic system. They call it a magnetic.
That's all an offshoot of the active suspension stuff that's been around since the 80s.
Yeah, but this was all very responsive. So you could drive over potholes or corrugation, and it would adjust to be a completely smooth ride. It was pretty impressive.
I think
it was an expensive system.
Check out Cadillac Magnasteer. I think that's what that is in use. I don't know if it's the actual Bose system or not, but I believe that's how it operates. Because I know it uses magnetism and some sort of liquid metal or bits inside the metal that are then magnetized.
Nice.
Yeah, it's the equivalent to some of the LCD electronic glass that changes the polarity inside the glass that makes it opaque or clear. The privacy glass, it's electronic. Same
the
idea,
electrostatic.
But same idea in the hydraulic fluid. By energizing it, it changes its flow rate.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, the Bose system was actually no fluid, purely electromagnetic.
Okay.
Oh, then maybe that is different than the Cadillac. Heaven forbid we do any pre-research here on the show. using
some what?
What? We'll just use our own knowledge.
Works for me.
All right. Moving on. So there's really not much. It's just more of a headline, and I wish I had known about this. And this was an operation a year ago when I went to the UK. Apparently, you can now rent a new Defender and tour the UK. Specifically in Yorkshire, there's a business that is opening up called Yorkshire Land Rover Hire, and there's no other detail than that you can hire. You'll be able to hire a Defender. I mean, when I looked at going to the UK last year, I did look into it, and it was outrageously expensive.
Of course you did.
Of course I did.
Of course you did.
And it was outrageously expensive.
Well, I don't think this is going to change that.
I don't think it will either, but there's no prices listed here.
Exactly. So. If you have to ask, you can't afford.
Can't afford. And they are working, and I know Harold is really keen to hear about this. They're working on a glamping version.
Right on that.
So check that out if you're going to the UK. That'll be in our show notes, of course. There's a link there from Atlantic British had an article on that.
See, I'd like it if they could do that here.
Ooh.
Rent a new Defender for the weekend or whatever. Just make it available in the rental fleets. I mean, I get that they don't meet regs and you can't sell them to the public and that, but put them in a rental fleet so people play with them a little bit.
Exactly.
Maybe we should cut this out of the podcast and start that ourselves.
Under the demonstration clause or something.
And next in Defender news, not really news, it's just kind of a neat thing that Autocar out of the UK did. They call it Land Rover Defender versus the Atlantic Ocean, and the car wins just. So if you haven't seen it, it came out, looks like on the 14th of August. They took a Defender 90 up to the north of Scotland and had a 2-mile stretch of ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, that they drove through where it got up to 2 meters in depth, and drove through it from one side to the other. And I'll spoil it for you. They made it.
It was actually 1.2 meters, not 2 meters.
No, he said it was 2 meters in depth.
He said it was 1.2.
That was the beginning, and then eventually got to 2 meters. Like that when they started having to downshift, it was 1.2 meters. That's when it was the water was coming over the bonnet, but it did get to 2 meters. They said.
Not exactly sure how that would work because that's well over 6 feet.
Maybe I misheard, but that's what I recall.
I'll have to listen to it again later because that seems a little bit far fetched.
So it was kind of cool. It was just a neat thing. They took a 20-year-old model that had a couple 100,000 miles on the clock,
right?
And
it wasn't new. It wasn't freshly rebuilt. It wasn't specially prepared. They just got an old truck and drove it.
Yeah, it's pretty entertaining. I like that he said that, his feet were still dry at the end of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I believe that.
Yeah, I don't think that meant there was no water in the cabin. I think he was wearing hip waders or something.
There's always
Exactly.
water in the cabin. What are you talking about? So
That's installed at the factory.
He was talking about salt water is what he really meant. There was normally water in the cabin. He was talking about there was no additional salt water in the cabin.
I think that's BS too. I think he was wearing big boots to keep it out of his feet.
Well, it was impressive. Immaterial of that, it was still impressive to see that D90 drive through there. There's water up over the bonnet. There's spray. The wipers can't keep up with anything. You can barely see out.
When can the wipers ever keep up, and when can you see out?
Don't tell anybody that. Shh, quiet. And but he still and it cruised along, and it didn't seem to have any difficulty at all.
Well, that's what it's made for.
It exactly, and it looked like 6 minutes of Rover porn as far as I was concerned. It was kick ass.
Yeah, relatively soft core Rover porn, but Rover porn nonetheless.
What 40?
Now we'll have to see how it fares in 6 months or a few years, having driven through the saltwater to that depth.
Got to say, I've seen some stuff on YouTube that is far more hardcore than that.
Oh yes, myself as well.
So if you, we'll have a link, of course, in the show notes if you want to go check out some of that Rover porn, if you will, for yourself. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you're listening because you want Rover porn. That's exactly what this.
This is our monthly allotment of porn for you.
Yes, exactly. And now it's video.
We need to have a separate section in our show notes for our monthly porn links.
All right, so before as we conclude the news, a couple shout-outs to some of our friends of the podcast. Graham and Louisa Bell of A to A fame have got their visa to get into Canada. So they're now, I believe, in British Columbia, headed on their way to Alaska.
And discovering the cold, as I understand it.
Yes, they will certainly do that. And
complaining
rain.
because it was 10 degrees C, which is like 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So, I mean... Clearly, they're not from around here.
No, they're not. As a matter of fact, they're not from around here. And our friends, the Lizzie Bus, are. I think Harold, you were following their exploits.
I think they're working down their list of loose ends that they're wrapping up. I think that there were a few things that needed to be sorted out after the big rebuild, and they're working down that little list of things. And I think they're soon going to be on their way. Yeah,
follow them on Facebook. They have. I think it's Lizzie Bus on Facebook.
Yeah, do they have a website too, or is it just the Facebook?
I think they just have the Facebook.
Okay.
I don't.
I think they have a website. They just don't update it as frequently as they do Facebook. So definitely check Facebook.
Good.
Oh, are they back from their first trip on their website yet?
And Sean Regan, who was on the show last month, I believe is south in Mexico. He's been taking some nice pictures. I haven't seen any additional Land Rover news, but I think that's what he's up to. And our friend in Vinyl Haven.
Jeff has been sleep deprived lately. He's been having lots of late night EMS call outs and flogging himself during the day doing his property maintenance stuff that he does. He's a man of many hats.
Yes, he is. And news about my 109. The 109 has gone in for service, and after doing a superb job this summer of taking me to various places and hauling stuff and towing the trailer with my cousin's belongings twice back and forth from between apartments, and so the air intake has to be repositioned and redone because it's coming loose. And we found out what the exhaust problem was. There's a giant hole in the muffler,
which happens from time to time.
Absolutely, it does. And
then, of course, there's the steering.
Oh, is there an update on the steering? How bad is it?
Is yet to be determined. I haven't excavated that far to get to the steering box.
Yeah, the steering is definitely less directional than you would like.
More vague than I would want.
That's a good way to put it. So hopefully next month we'll have another. Maybe the 109 will be back. And
it's very much one of those vehicles that you can't drive. You just herd down the road.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. So that's the news. And coming up after the M word will be our conversation with our listener, Justin. So right now, the M word.
In an earlier episode, we discussed the role of the steam engine in propelling the Industrial Revolution. Today, I'd like to discuss another invention that laid the foundation for the machine age. It's not any particular machine, but it's what all machines are made from, standardized, interchangeable parts. The concept of interchangeable parts is anything but new. During their first Punic Wars in the 3rd century BC, the Carthaginians built their warships with standardized parts that even had assembly instructions written right on them. In the late Middle Ages, the Venetians were mass-producing ships on assembly lines with pre-manufactured parts. In what could be called the world's first factory, the Venetian arsenal had a production rate of almost 1 ship per day. During the 11th century AD, the Chinese expanded on the idea when they invented movable type. 4 centuries later, Johannes Gutenberg perfected the movable type printing press and started a revolution. He was able to produce Bibles and other books so inexpensively that they were affordable to the masses. This was the dawn of the Age of Enlightenment and perhaps the origin of the middle class. In the 18th century, after decades of military defeat, Lieutenant General Jean-Baptiste Vaquet de Gribeauval was tasked with overhauling the French artillery. Some of my more astute listeners will recognize that name as the man who first conceived of self-propelled vehicles that could haul guns and supplies more efficiently than horses could. But today we're going to talk about the guns. General Gribeauval redesigned the cannons to replace the heavy, hollow-cast barrels with ones that were precisely bored. This allowed the shells to fit tighter within the bores, which made the cannons more powerful and more accurate. This meant the barrels could be shorter and lighter, and the carriages could be smaller and more maneuverable. More importantly, by utilizing standardized barrels and shells, any cannon could fire any shell from any French armory, and the same replacement parts could be used to repair every cannon in the unit. This simplified the logistics and greatly reduced the cost of running an army. In just a few years, the French artillery went from being the joke of Europe to one of the world's best, thanks largely to interchangeable parts. Around the same time, a French gunsmith named Honoré Blanc was inspired by Gribeauval's work and decided to apply the principle of interchangeable parts to making muskets. By 1778, Blanc had developed a flintlock mechanism using interchangeable parts. He was able to demonstrate this for a group of scientists by fitting several muskets with flintlocks chosen at random from a large pile of parts. He was never able to make an entire musket from interchangeable parts, but nevertheless he was a pioneer in the development of the concept. 2 decades later, the new government of the United States felt the need to build an army, and given the increased tension with England and France in the wake of the French Revolution, they needed to do it fast. They offered a contract for 10,000 muskets to be delivered within 2 years. Eli Whitney, who was famous but not necessarily wealthy for inventing the cotton gin, saw the potential for profit and accepted the contract in early 1798. Despite having no experience making guns, Whitney was able to get the job based on his reputation with the cotton gin. A few months later, Whitney was given a copy of Honoré Blanc's memoirs, and he quickly became a proponent of interchangeable parts. In 1801, Whitney arranged a demonstration before the United States Congress. Similar to Blanc's demonstration, Whitney disassembled 10 identical muskets into a pile, mixed it up, then reassembled the muskets using parts randomly picked from the pile. What Congress didn't know was that these were not ordinary production muskets. They had been meticulously handcrafted by skilled artisans. Whitney had staged the event as an act of showmanship, to distract the government and to justify his delays and cost overruns. The trick worked better than Whitney could have imagined. Congress ordered a new standard for government equipment, and Whitney was hailed as an innovator, despite having contributed very little toward the development of interchangeable parts. The earliest successful attempts at mass-produced interchangeable parts were in wood. First in 1803, when Mark Brunel mass-produced pulley blocks for the Royal Navy at the rate of 100,000 per year. In 1814, Eli Terry began mass-producing clocks in Plymouth, Connecticut. Terry's clock parts were made from wood because it was still too difficult to make precise parts from metal. Before that could happen, there would need to be great advances in machine tools and an important new invention, the milling machine. Paradoxically, the milling machine is the only machine that can reproduce itself. Every part of a milling machine can be duplicated on a milling machine. In other words, it takes a milling machine to make a milling machine. Historians disagree as to who actually invented the first accurate milling machine, but they generally believe it was either John Hall, a gunsmith working at the Federal Arsenal in Harper's Ferry, or Simeon North, a Connecticut gunmaker with close ties to Eli Terry's clockworks. Eli Whitney was also working on a milling machine of his own, but his efforts were later, and Whitney's company never achieved efficient production until after Whitney's death in 1825. What is clear is the milling machine was essential in meeting the government's mandate for guns made from interchangeable parts. An interesting historical footnote is the role of Eli Whitney in the American Civil War. In the late 1700s, slavery was actually on the decline in the American South. Cotton production was not practical due to the difficulty in extracting the seeds from the fibers. The cotton gin provided a simple way to do this. Ironically, Whitney's labor-saving device made growing cotton with slave labor very profitable. This greatly boosted the Southern economy and the slave-owning antebellum society, ultimately leading to the Civil War. It is also believed that Whitney's promotion of interchangeable parts played a large role in the industrialization of the North, which ultimately determined the outcome of the war. In a sense, he was instrumental in both starting and ending the American Civil War. So perhaps, in the annals of mechanical history, we should remember Eli Whitney as less of an inventor and more like some sort of one-man war machine.
Welcome back to the Centresteer Podcast, number 29. It is now time for our first inaugural, never happened before, Tech Talkback segment. Is that what we're calling this?
Talk back to our listeners?
No, I don't think we want to talk back to our listeners.
Why not?
It doesn't sound right. So Christian...
Talk back from our listeners?
Christian Toth, who will be joining us very shortly, has emailed. And so I will read a portion of that email, and then we'll actually talk to Christian. So he's been listening to the podcast for the past few months, and he enjoys the podcast. So there's a little shout-out for us. Unfortunately, he works in a cube and constantly itching to get his head buried in his Land Rover. Thanks to the podcast, it's the next best thing. Make you feel good, Harold?
Better.
So he caught the Land Rover bug early at the age of 17 with a 1968 109 that needed an engine. Since then, he's had 3 discos, and he's on his 3rd series.
That's a lot of trucks in a short amount of time.
Is it not? Because now he's like 18. Yeah, no.
Holy turnover, Batman.
No, he's not. So my current build is more theoretical and hopefully will work. The idea is to have a Rover that looks like a 2A, but drive like a D90. I have some of it figured out. I also have a NAS D90 I found on Craigslist, and a Defender axles from a friend, and a series body. And I stalked and successfully purchased a 300 TDI. I want that TDI. With transmission and transfer case while he was in Texas. He's currently in Maryland. So the idea is it's all supposed to go together like Legos, right?
Okay.
So, Harold, that's our listener. Christian Toth is now joining us live from Skype from Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
Or the near Baltimore, Maryland.
Great state of Maryland.
Hey. Yeah, well, hey guys, glad to be on, and appreciate you taking me, my mail and my call.
Well, it's this could be interesting. So you've got a pile of parts there. I'm just trying to make.
Yeah, my parents. Yeah. I moved back from Texas, and my parents were, I guess you can say, less than thrilled that I was bringing 2.5 Rovers home of just parts that are supposed to be in our barn.
2.5 Rovers worth of parts, but no actual single complete Rover, correct?
Well, I had a Discovery that towed me home, but yeah. But yeah, so the idea is, like you were saying, I really like the series Rovers, the 2As with the, the headlights in the middle. But I want to be able to go on the highway.
Okay.
And not leak as much oil. And getting above to 15 miles per gallon would obviously be a bonus.
Okay.
So I have Defender axles. I got a NOS Defender 90 frame for $100 on Craigslist.
Okay, so it's just a frame. It's not an entire D90 then that you're starting with.
No, just a frame.
Okay, but you've got a frame.
A little ambitious.
Frame and axle, so you can build a rolling chassis on that's a 90.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I know all the parts are theoretically, I thought they were all interchangeable. The fenders look the same, and the bulkhead looks the same, and so I have a. Yeah, right, within reason. So I have I kind of want it lifted, and now that I can, because I have coil springs, so I got RT 3-inch springs. I have the correcting casters for the front, and then the drag links in the back. So I have a rolling chassis right now.
Okay.
So now is the part of trying to, I put the bulkhead on, and then the fenders just see how they fit. But the first thing I noticed was the tubs are not the same.
Okay.
The Series tub is like 4 inches shorter than a Defender tub.
Well, that's because there's a difference in wheelbase between a 90 and an 88. And actually, the difference is more than 2 inches because the 90 is actually closer to 92.
Mm-hmm.
So, I wasn't sure if that was going to be an issue or not because actually on the long wheelbase trucks, the 109, 110, the tubs are virtually identical dimensionally. But in the short wheelbase trucks, that's not the case. So I was curious how much difference there was going to be forward of the bulkhead, but it sounds like most of the difference is going to be rearward. And it's all going to be it's all going to be in the tub too because the doors should be the same. Doors will interchange.
Right.
So you could stretch the tub, or you could get yourself a 90 tub out there.
Ideally, getting a tub would be nice. They're harder to find than I thought.
Yeah.
I guess I contacted Heritage Land Rover, down in Florida or South Carolina. He had one, but he wants like $2,200 for it. Yeah. And so I mean that's the my last option. I called Les up at Rovers North. Just to see if he knew of one, but he said he didn't know of one right away, but he took down my information, said he would kind of do a little hunt for me. And actually recently, somebody contacted me on Defender Source, saying for me to give him a call. So
yeah, Defender Source is a good place to look, definitely. Another thing you can do, if you're comfortable doing metal work, you can always buy tub sides, which is the outer skin, and take apart the tub and then put together your own 90 tub using all the bits of the 88 tub, but new sides on it, which would effectively make it longer.
Right.
But you have to be good with doing some metal work because there's going to be a little bit
aluminum, especially.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on your tolerance for that kind of thing.
Yeah. I do have two 88 tubs now, but I was hoping to use the other one as a trailer.
Okay.
So we'll see.
You'd have one to screw up if you wanted to try it.
For sure, yeah. But yeah, I mean, so I actually just bought my cross member to support the transfer case, I guess.
Right.
I guess TDI 300 TDIs have different mounting.
Well, and that's where I wanted to go next, and that's where I think the real head scratching and potential problems are going to happen. The thing you noticed first was the tub was a different length. Well, that's easy to fix. The real problem is you're not going to have a lot of room in front of the bulkhead for what you want to do. In fact, what you're trying to do is not really all that new because guys have been building hybrid Rovers for a long time, but almost all of them started from the other direction. They tried to take a series truck and make it look like a Defender because you couldn't get Defenders here until a few years ago.
Right.
So they put a Defender front end on a series truck, which is a better direction to go. The real limitation with the series truck is the amount of space you have in the engine bay. It's very narrow and it's very short front to back.
Right.
The problem you're going to have is the 300 TDI sits farther forward in the engine bay than any engine that preceded it.
Well, that's why they put that made it a flat front, right? Is because when they added the V8 into it, they needed that extra room, right?
The V8 and later the 300 TDI, they needed the extra space, so they brought the radiator forward. And you're actually compounding the problem by putting the headlights into that space, too. I think you're going to really have a serious battle of real estate up there, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, I have thought about an electric fan. That should nullify needing a mechanical fan. I just hope that, I don't know if that's going to buy me enough space.
I don't think it will, to be honest. Because the problem is you're going to need a big radiator and the intercooler to make it all, and that takes more space than just a stock radiator. Now, let me ask you this. You say you bought the engine and transmission as a unit. Do you know if it came out of a Disco or a Defender?
Came out of a 110.
Okay.
Or I guess a 110, right?
All right, 110 Defender. It uses the Defender style shifter on the transmission, so that's good. A lot of guys make the mistake of buying the takeouts from a disco because they're cheaper. Now with the 300 TDI, there's no difference in the engine, but the transmission is different, and specifically where the shifter comes out of the transmission is different. And a lot of guys put them into series trucks and end up with the shifter next to their butt. They're reaching behind them to shift it.
Oh, because it's actually further back in a disco.
Back on the disco because of the seating position in the disco. You're much more stretched out, so they've moved the shifter back on the transmission and run that real short shift lever so that you can, and then it works out that you can reach it. But on the Defender, because of the geometry, they end up using a taller shifter, and it's further forward in the transmission. So you need the Defender style shifter, definitely. So that's a plus.
Right. I actually did read also the reason I went, is more adamant, I guess, about getting the Defender one, or the way I justified it more to myself, I guess, was it's the turbo position. I guess it's the intake of the turbo would point down on a Discovery or on a Defender, but in the Discovery it points to the side, and it ends up interfering with the steering linkage, I guess.
That's true with a 200 TDI, but not so much with a 300 TDI.
Oh, okay. All right.
But let me get my thoughts together here. The 300 TDI was designed to be used with the R380 transmission, which is a more robust transmission, but it's also longer than the LT77 it replaced. I have heard of guys swapping out the flywheel housing and adapting the LT77 transmission to the back of the 300 TDI, which buys you, I think, 5 inches, if I remember correctly, of length, which you're going to need every inch you can get. Which is a possibility. There is also another solution. So Land Rover, for a short period of time, made what's maybe not officially known, but in the aftermarket it's known as the Stumpy R380. It was intended to be a replacement for the LT77, which had gone out of production, and they developed this as in a situation where you needed the LT77 but couldn't get one. They made this. Internally, it's the R380, which is a more robust transmission, but the bell housing and input are shorter, so it's the same overall length as the LT77, and it will bolt up to your engine.
Okay.
Are those available here in North America?
They're a little harder to find than some of the other Defender parts. So, I mean, yes, technically available, but that's a...
How would he know that one's a Stumpy versus not?
It's pretty obvious when you're looking at them.
Okay, but there's no, code or something if you're buying one online and, you're talking to somebody?
No, but it's pretty obvious, or people will describe it as such. But the other thing you can do is you can buy the parts to do it yourself. If you know a good transmission shop, or if you're comfortable doing transmission work, it's a matter of disassembling, removing the stuff that's too long, and replacing it with the right stuff to make it shorter. Ashcroft Transmissions in England sells all the parts. It's about a $1,000 job. So I mean, it's not cheap, but it might get you out of trouble. Like I said, you're going to need every inch you can get, and I think you're going to be... I like where you're going. I like the notion, but what you're asking is a big ask.
Are you doing a lot of this work yourself, Christian, or are you going to do you have a shop you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I have been. So far, I've been doing it myself. I bought, I guess the what do you call it? The engine mounts. It's like an engine mount kit. That also, I bought the transfer case kit for a NOS 90 from Overland Specialties. They have a bolt-up kit.
Right, it's a conversion.
That has a guide, for where to put the engine mount, but that's obviously based on having, a flat front end.
Right, the standard Defender front end.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that kit was produced by Land Rover for a short period of time. When the 300 TDI first came out, the idea was that they were going to discontinue the 200 TDI, so they offered this kit as a way to convert your Land Rover when it came time to replace your engine.
Oh.
And I think since they've discontinued that kit, since it's been so long, but others in the aftermarket have picked up the idea and run with it. But yeah, that kit was originally available from Land Rover.
Gotcha. But yeah, so I actually had another question, another point would be, I would like to do power steering, but I guess that's also dependent on room.
Well, do you have you didn't get a steering box with your chassis?
I do.
Okay.
I had to cut the rod in order to get the steering wheel out, in order to get the bulkhead out, because the nut was rusted in the steering wheel.
Lovely. Okay, so you're going to have a little bit of work to do to repair that. What? I mean, did you cut the column, or did you cut the little shaft that goes between the column and the box?
The column. Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
That was
it was a long
mistake.
day, and it was really hot, and I just wanted to go home and get my...
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, you get in a hurry, you want to achieve a goal, but you want to go home. And
you only have so much time. Yeah.
And the next day you realize that you did something that was less than brilliant.
Right.
Yeah, we've been there.
Oh, yeah.
I just hope... I mean, the time when I was cutting it, I was like, I really hope nobody's watching me, but I need to get out of here.
I would have rather butchered the bulkhead at that point than cut the column, just in terms of ease of repair. But all right, so you need yourself a steering column.
But what about the power steering? So is that something that he has enough room for that?
Well, the power steering is really, if you've got the box and it's mounted to the frame, and as long as everything else fits in its place, that's probably not going to be the problem. The issue is going to be whether or not the shaft that goes from the column to the box is going to hit something on its way past, which shouldn't be a real problem. There's a pump already on the front of your engine, so that's just a matter of plumbing to hook it up.
Yeah, okay.
I don't see that as an insurmountable problem. It's much harder to convert a series truck to power steering because they weren't designed for it. But Defenders that came with it, especially North American spec, that there was no option but have it. That's really kind of a no-brainer.
You got to join the crew of the mighty manual power steering. We're doing it ourselves.
The Armstrong crew?
Yeah.
The Armstrong, that's what I was looking for, the Armstrong crew.
Yeah. Now, mind you, what you're trying to do would be much easier if you're willing to have a right-hand drive truck because, then there's no question that the steering clears everything because...
Oh, there's plenty of room on that side.
Well, that's the way they were designed. That's the way God intended. Yeah. So, everything's easier in a right-hand drive Rover.
Have you driven?
They're really not that much harder to drive. They're not harder to drive at all.
No, I agree.
The only exception to that is when you're merging onto the highway and you don't have windows in the back.
Yes, you have that extreme left blind spot. That would be you need to compensate for that. That can be, especially if you have a trailer and you're coming off the turnpike and merging onto Route 30. Have you driven a right-hand drive truck yet, Christian?
Yeah, my first one was a right-hand drive.
Oh, okay. So you're familiar then.
My right hand. Yeah, so I always got jokes, from my friends. They're like, one, why are you driving this box that looks like a mail truck? And then they would just go on they would just go further. Like, it's already right-hand drive. You can get a summer job delivering mail. And
well, we know better. Yeah. We know better. We're here to support you. We're here to support you in your right-hand drivedness.
Yeah.
I don't know about on the Defender, but on the Series, all the clutch hydraulics are a lot easier when it's right-hand drive as well.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Definitely on the Defender as well.
So were you considering right-hand drive then, Christian?
No, I mean, I wasn't because I have everything.
Yeah, it's hard.
I mean, the Defender the 110 I took it out of was a left-hand drive.
Okay.
I mean, it sucks because that was the time I was leaving Texas, so I didn't get. I mean, I tried to take as much as I could from that Defender, but obviously I should have taken more of the steering components.
Yeah. It dawned on me now. You were talking about a North American.
Well,
that makes sense.
And the Defenders, even the rest of world ones, none of the Defenders were really made to be reversible like the Series truck were.
Okay.
The Series trucks, you really, in a couple hours, you can convert one from left to right. You just move everything from one side to the other. But the Defender actually had a directional bulkhead. And the steering didn't have the extra arms, and et cetera, et cetera. They were a lot harder to reverse. It was possible, but you had to change a lot more parts.
Well, you're using the Series 2A bulkhead, or are you using the NAS 90 bulkhead?
Yeah, I don't have any Defender. The only Defender part I have is the frame.
Okay, all right. So it gets easier.
Yeah.
The only challenge you'd have would be coming up with a right-hand drive steering box for the frame, and yeah.
Oh, both the series that I have were left-hand drive.
Okay.
So I have that in my favor, at least.
Well, yeah, but the series is reversible. It doesn't matter.
Oh, you're right.
Now, do you have a steering column from a series truck somewhere, right?
Yeah, I do. But I guess my other thought was, I mean, what kind of stuff should I be pulling from, like a D1? Is there any, particular pieces from a Discovery 1 that I should grab from a junkyard?
Steering box, steering linkage, but you have the steering box. Any linkage you need for the tie rods, that sort of thing, that stuff will transfer over.
Right.
I think, since Morgan reminded me you're running a series bulkhead, you ought to look at a series steering column. That way the stuff that's inside the cabin looks right. Yeah,
well, that's my big thing. I definitely want to use, the wire wheel steering wheel from a series.
The banjo.
I thought about.
Now the challenge there will be separating you have to actually, since the rambling here. Since the series truck integrated the steering box and the steering column into one unit, you'll have to separate that, which means a little bit of modification of the column. It's a little bit of machine work, which there's places online that can describe how to do that, or if you get in over your head, send me an email later. I'll walk you through it. It's not that big a deal, and you end up doing a little bit of fabricating to make it work. But given that you sort of cut things as you go, you're going to have to do that anyway, so...
Okay.
That allows you, on the other hand, to put it back in a place where it's out of the way of your turbo and things in case you have a clearance problem. I don't think you will. Just knowing how the 300 TDI is built, I don't think you're going to have a problem with the turbo hitting anything.
Right. Good.
I'm worried about intercooler plumbing, radiator clearance, all
that
stuff.
I know what they've done. The intercoolers that they'll put them. You have your main radiator opening, but then you have this little side areas. They usually tuck them, right to the side of the radiator.
Yeah, but you got headlights in there too.
Right.
Maybe if you turn the intercooler sideways across the front, and
right.
We did it that way. The problem there is you're putting some extra thermal load into your radiator, which may be a concern. But
yeah.
Fortunately, you're not still going to drive it in Texas, so overheating won't be as much of a challenge as it is. You still got to concern yourself with it, but Maryland's a much cooler climate than Texas, which will help you.
For sure.
Ultimately, I think that is going to be your big teething problem is overheating.
Yeah, I guess you were saying something about the radiator, so I guess I wouldn't want to use a series radiator. I'd need something heavier.
No, absolutely not. That works great in a 200 DI conversion, which Morgan and I will discuss later, which is a non-turbocharged turbo diesel.
Gotcha.
Are we helping you, Christian?
Yeah. No, you're
clear as mud.
Things through and talking through is helpful.
Yeah, we're probably throwing some things at you and some more things for you to think about, but at least maybe we're trying to get you thinking about the right things.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, again, nothing is impossible. It's just sometimes there's additional challenges that you hadn't thought of.
Right.
Are you on Facebook, or are you familiar with the Northeast... what is they called?
Oh yeah.
It's NELRC or something.
Yeah.
Well, that's the club, but then there's also a Facebook page called the Northeastern Coalition for Gently Used Rover Parts
or something. Yeah, right. Yeah, I think there's we'll hook you up.
Know that.
Yeah, I'll hook you up with that, especially since you're in this area. And there's a part swap coming up at I think middle of September. I think it's near Philly, if I'm not mistaken. So that it might not be far for you, and it might be a good opportunity to pick up some things that you might need.
True. It's really hard. Actually, I'm obviously still good friends with all my guys in Texas and all my SCAR people and Texas Rovers. But I see a bunch of these Rover clubs on the East Coast, but now I don't even have a Rover that runs. It's more of just like a tease, so I try not to look as much as I want to.
That's not actually a requirement for membership in many clubs.
No.
Because, quite often you can have several Rovers, but none of them will run at any one time.
That's true.
So
That's true.
You try to have as many as possible to increase your odds, but sometimes the planets don't line up.
That's right. I mean, Morgan's doesn't have a working Rover at the moment.
And we still let him show up.
Yeah. And I have a half working Rover at the moment, out of 2. Yeah. And I know the you're actually in a good place on the East Coast for Land Rovers, because there's a huge club and collection of Rovers in around DC.
I have heard that. Virginia and stuff.
Yeah, Rove, R-O-V-E-R. No, Rovers, right?
Rovers is out of Philly.
Rovers out of Philly. And then what's the one out of Virginia?
That's Rove, R-O-A-V.
R-O-A-V. That's right. Thank you.
Rover Owners Association of Virginia.
Yeah, look up R-O-A-V, Christian. That's Rover Owners of Virginia. That's a good. That's a good club.
They have a rich history of club involvement, large membership, annual event called the Mid-Atlantic Rally, or MAR for short.
Yeah, I have heard that. Okay.
And I think MAR has had some issues in the last couple of years, and I think it's back this year.
Yeah, it's making a comeback.
Oh, okay.
It used to be back in the day when I got into it back in the early 2000s. It was like the largest gathering of Rovers on the East Coast. You get 200-300 trucks show up.
But possibly even
my goodness,
possibly even the largest in North America.
Yeah. Although I think the Sully Hull one has taken over.
It has taken over since. Yeah, the national rally.
Right. Yeah. But that's I'll make sure you get hooked up with those. At least find out where they are and track those down. They could be helpful to you.
Of course, if you're ever up our way, you're welcome to join our club.
Oh yeah, you don't even have to be up our way to join our club.
Well, I mean, you can join us in person. You can join the club anyway. We don't care, but we have members farther away than you.
That's true. Yeah, we're the Fort Pitt Land Rover group.
Gotcha. Well, I hope one day I can drive my series Defender up there.
There you go. Yeah, bring it on up and show it to us.
Whatever I'm going to call it, I'm not sure yet.
Stage 1.
Yeah.
It's almost like a stage. It's almost like a stage 1.
Yeah, except that it's coil sprung. So really, it's.
Yeah, it's not really. Yeah, sort of, kind of pre-Defender.
Well, I don't know what you'd call it.
Well, it's a hybrid. It's a hybrid.
It really is. It's a hybrid done backwards the way everybody else does it.
Right.
Most people take a series and make it into a Defender. He's taking a Defender and making it into a series.
Right. So, Christian, you will keep us informed of your progress and come back on the podcast and ask any other questions or give us an update.
Or send us another email or hit us up on Facebook or whatever.
Well, we look forward.
We'll do. Hopefully have the engine dropped in by then.
Do you have a timeline? Is there, or are you doing this as you go, kind of, when you get time?
I really wanted. I just bought a house, so that's taking my time up. But I really wanted to be able to drive it in the summer.
So we'll check back in a couple of years then.
Well, I don't have kids or a wife, so it should move a little quicker.
Oh, well then. Oh, good. Well then, yes.
Oh, you didn't really buy a house then.
You
just bought a shop with a lounge.
Do you have a shop in the house that you bought? Do you have a?
No, it's actually downtown in Baltimore City, so it'll stay with my parents in their barn.
Gotcha.
And I'll just come home and work on it.
A real barn find. That.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice.
So to sum up, it sounds like your little project, which is very interesting, nothing I've heard of being done before, but that's always a cool thing. I like uniqueness, so this could be interesting. It sounds like you're going to have to lengthen the tub, and then you're going to have to find a way to get 10 pounds of crap into a 5-pound bag in front of the bulkhead. You've got an engine and transmission combination which is too long for the space, plus you've got a radiator, an intercooler, and some headlights, all duking it out for the same real estate. This could be fun.
So, Christian, we thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, and you're going to come back on the show. You have to, and give us an update on how things are coming along. And if you have other questions, we'll try to address them here on the show. I think that can be very valuable.
Well, awesome. I appreciate you guys taking my call.
Yeah, no problem. Not trying to scare you off. Just wanted to make you aware of what's what.
It certainly sounded like you were scaring you off, didn't it?
Did a good job of it.
Well, no, I mean, I don't want to discourage you, but you need to know what you're going to be facing so that there's no surprise down the road when you go to stick it all in and it doesn't fit.
Yeah, you got some work to do.
The sooner you can start thinking about it and planning ahead for it, the better.
Right. Yeah. That's probably a reason why no one has tried it before, or at least that we know of. Well,
there's a reason why everybody puts Defender front ends on them.
Yes, you gain that extra, was about 6 inches of
I think
real
it's
estate.
8 or 9, really.
Yeah. Is it that much?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, thanks again, Christian, and And we'll take a little break. When we come back, we'll talk about our heritage segment for the month. Welcome back to the Centresteer Podcast number 29. This is August 2015, although we are recording still in September 6th, 2015. And it's time now for our heritage segment and our heritage... Are you a correspondent? Our heritage correspondent, Morgan.
Yeah, I think correspondent is good enough.
Fair enough.
This month we are going to continue moving up the drivetrain and cover the engines that were offered in the Series Land Rovers and what some of the possible upgrade options are there. Similar to the gearboxes and transfer cases and everything we covered a couple of months ago, there are a lot of options. We won't go into full detail on all of them. But let's just sort of jump into the history. So in 1948, on the original Series Land Rover, which was just the Land Rover, they were really pulling drivetrain components out of the Rover P3. So they used the same 1.5-liter four-cylinder petrol engine from the P3. I believe it used an outdated inlet over exhaust valve arrangement, so it was a little weird. And I don't believe that one had cooling between the cylinders. It offered about 50 horsepower, not a whole lot. I think it was about 80 feet-pound of maximum torque and a Solex carburetor.
Although in terms of specific output, that makes it more powerful than the engines that replaced it.
That is true.
In terms of horsepower per liter.
Right. Yes. And then just a few years in, they upgraded that to a 2-liter, again, 4-cylinder petrol. That one had Siamese bores. So that's the one that had the no water cooling between the cylinders. And I think it was about 52 horsepower.
Right, with the Siamese bores.
Right, exactly. So not so good on cooling.
That one still had the intake over exhaust, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I'm a little fuzzy on that part of the history.
Yeah, the early years are very interesting because they were, this was a brand new product. They were taking parts from where they could and upgrading them how they could.
Saving money, the British way.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it, I believe we discussed this a couple of months ago, they were very limited on what amount of steel they could get to produce these.
Right.
So
hence all the aluminum bodywork.
Exactly. And let's see, in 1954, they switched, they upgraded that 2-liter 4-cylinder petrol to have spread bore with better cooling between the cylinders. I think they modified it again in 55 or so to a later spread bore model. But it was a relatively minor change, I believe. And then the first sort of big change was beyond moving to the 2-liter, was in 1957. They introduced a 2-liter 4-cylinder diesel option, which was 55 horsepower or so. That one had the more modern overhead valve layout.
Right.
And I don't believe that this diesel was based on that petrol engine. I think it was a new diesel engine.
In fact, that was really the foundation for the 2.25 petrol.
Exactly.
The standard Land Rover 4-cylinder architecture, if you will. It became the standard block configuration for decades.
Right. Absolutely.
And that was the first. It was, I think, the first clean sheet engine, if you will, that Land Rover made.
Yep. And being a diesel, obviously that one was fuel injected. I think that had a CAV
by
injection.
Definition.
Right, exactly. And interestingly, CAV, who made the fuel injectors for those, was later acquired by Lucas.
Correct.
So. And then, in 1958, they introduced the Land Rover Series 2. So technically the two and a quarter 4-cylinder petrol was introduced then. However,
technically it was available for 1 year in the Series 1.
Oh, was it?
Yes.
Oh, yes, because there was a crossover between the Series 1 and the 2 there.
Right, because I actually have a 58 Series 1 that was built for the 2 1/4. It has an 88 chassis.
Nice.
That was the reason for the stretch from 86 to 88 inches was to accommodate the 2 1/4.
Excellent. Now, I understood it that approximately the first 1,500 or so of the Series 2s actually even used the 2-liter petrol because they had more of the engines that they sort of needed to use up from the earlier production.
That wouldn't surprise me, but I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, so, I'm not sure exactly how that worked. That was a pretty big transition for them.
Right.
And so that, as Harold mentioned, that was related to the 2-liter diesel. So that was the introduction. And that 2 1/4 liter petrol has been used a long time. I think that one offered about 51 horsepower and 124 foot-pound torque. And they switched to the Solex carburetors for that. And they still had the 2-liter diesel option. And let's see, the Series 2As, which were introduced in 61, those used the same 2 1/4 liter petrols. And in 62, they started offering the 2 1/4 diesel, so they upgraded that diesel to the same 2 1/4.
Needfully so.
Yes.
the 2 1/4 diesel was barely adequate. The 2-liter is just abominable.
Exactly. And then in terms of further sort of major upgrades, those didn't occur until 67 in the 2A, and that's when they started introducing the 2.6 liter inline 6 petrol in the 109s.
Which, as I understand it, also stepped back to the intake over exhaust valve configuration.
I believe that's the case, yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple of heads available, depending on whether you were talking about the, if I remember correctly, the stock head was the intake over exhaust, but they made available the Westlake head, which was out of one of the Rover cars that was both valves and head.
Nice. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. That's awesome.
Which is the hot ticket to have, but if you're into hot rodding these things.
Exactly. And I think they switched to the SU carburetors for that. And then in 62, they introduced the 2A forward control, which for the most part used, I believe, the 2 1/4 petrol. But for the export models, they started partially into that line. They started using the 2.6 liter inline 6.
Whatever was available for the 109 was available for the 2A forward control, because under the skin it was just a 109.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we'll probably go into all the different body types later, but
wasn't
they just moved the cab up and over.
But wasn't that FC a gun carriage? Was that enough?
No. That was the 101 FC, which is different. A completely different vehicle. That was purpose built for the military as a gun tractor. The 2B was 2A and 2B forward controls were commercial vehicles.
Right. They were pretty much like utility vehicles and trucks and stuff like that. So it really was just to give you increased load space by moving the cab up and over the engine.
Yeah, the same reason that the cab over engine trucks in this country were popular.
Exactly.
Maximize the amount of load space on the wheelbase.
Yep. And I think that the 2.6 liter became just standard in the 2B forward controls, which was like 66.
Right.
So it wasn't that far into it.
Yeah, I think that they weren't selling many with the 4-cylinder.
No,
for
I can't
reasons.
imagine. Yeah. Yeah, when you have something that's, rated for pulling much more cargo, a 2 1/4 is not great.
Try driving an ambulance body with a 2 1/4 petrol.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, especially on American roads.
Yep.
Yeah.
And let's see, for the Land Rover Series 3 in 1971, they were obviously still using the 2.25 4-cylinder petrol. I think they had it up to about 70 horsepower at that point.
I was going to say, I think 72.
Was it 72?
Although the difference between 70 and 72 is not enough, so...
No, exactly. And I've been going back and forth between sources, so...
Yeah, just best to remember they don't go fast.
No. I think they switched over to the Zenith carburetors at that point.
Yeah.
And then in 1980, they actually upgraded them to the 5 main bearing crankshafts. So a little more robust.
Yeah, it made it a little bit stronger. Didn't change the power output, but it did increase the reliability.
Yep, exactly.
And more importantly, it laid the foundation for future expansion of that engine platform.
Yep. And they continued having a 2.6 liter inline 6 for that as well. I think, again, they upgraded the carburetors. I think they switched to the Zenith Strombergs.
Which isn't really an upgrade. That's just an accommodation of emissions controls.
Oh, okay.
That
makes sense.
They're a little cleaner than the SUs, but functionally they're the same thing. Power output's the same.
Yep.
Harder to tune, harder to work on, but,
Right. And then in terms of, much more power, that didn't really come until the introduction of the Forward Control 101, the FC 101 in 72. And that used the 3.35 liter V8 petrol from the Range Rover. How did they do
3.35?
I don't remember.
So I thought they were all 3.5 liters.
They might have been. That might have been a typo on my part.
Okay. Just checking, because you might have found something I'd never
3.5.
heard of, and it wouldn't surprise me that you did. But
Yep.
I think they're 3.5, but the horsepower was turned way down on them.
Right. What was it? Were those 158, or was that in terms of horsepower? That might have been sort of the max around that time. And those were based on the Buick V8. I think we've discussed that in the past. And, used in a lot of different British vehicles.
They became
Era.
ubiquitous.
Yep. Lots of the sports cars, a lot of the larger vehicles. I think in the FC 101, they were using 2 SU carburetors. I could be wrong on that.
That was a fairly common configuration for that.
Yeah.
The Range Rovers used the same thing back in the day.
Nice. That makes sense.
One carburetor fed each bank of the V.
Exactly. And then, obviously, they continued to use that power plant for the Stage 1 V8, which was introduced in 1979. And that was sort of their transition to the Defender in terms of experimentation technologically.
Right, figuring out how much power they could throw to it and get away with it, and then what they needed to do to make it work.
Exactly.
Sort of a rolling test bed, if you will.
Yes. And actually, things didn't change much initially for the Defender. I think the 109 was still running, the 110, when it was introduced in 83, I think that was still running the 2.25 petrol.
Was it the 2.25, or were they up to the 2.5 by then?
I think, no, it was still the 2.25 in 83, running Weber carbs. And I think in 84, they had the 2.5 liter diesel.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's when they switched over.
The 2.5 NA?
Yeah, and then also in 84, they added the 2.5 petrol as well.
Right, as long as they're going to punch the block, they may as well make them available for both versions.
Exactly.
At that time, it was still the same block, which is very interesting. You don't hear of that being done successfully very often. I mean, people think of common block, and they think of, in this country, of Oldsmobile, and that was a disaster. But in this case, Land Rover did it the right way. They designed a diesel block and then used it for their gasoline engines, and not the other way around.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how much our listeners are familiar with diesel, but the compression ratios are so much higher because you're igniting on compression instead of introducing electrical spark to ignite the fuel.
I believe I did an article about that a while back.
I think you did.
Yeah.
So you have to have a really strong block.
Yeah,
to handle that.
The compression ratio is roughly twice, and the cylinder pressure prior to ignition is about 3 times.
Yep. Yeah, I think
about 400 in a healthy block. It's about 450 psi in the cylinder, just from compression, whereas a healthy petrol engine is about 150.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a lot of force, a lot of pressure.
Exactly.
Hence the low end torque.
That's part of it. Yeah.
So that pretty much covers, obviously, the Defenders, changed significantly over the years.
We can keep on going if you want, or you just want to cover the applications to the series truck.
Yeah, I think at this point, just the applications to the series truck.
Although the Defender engines become relevant when you try to put them into a series truck.
That is true.
I've heard that. Yeah. Where did I hear that just recently?
Yeah. There are quite a few conversion options. One of the very popular ones related to our call with Christopher was Christian. Yes, thank you.
See, I'm not the only one that has problems with names.
And that's why you have me.
True.
That's why. But Morgan, your name is still on the monitor.
It's probably good.
You haven't called him Ian in a while.
That's true.
I don't think I will. I think I'm done with that.
Nice. Still, don't take down the label, just in case.
It's cool.
But one of the very popular ones, partially because of the space and the power, and being able to retain the original, transmission, is using the 200DI, which is a 2.5 liter diesel. And I believe that someone has had that conversion process performed on theirs.
I might have done about 3 or 4 of them. Yeah, the cool thing is it's based on the 200 TDI, actually, which obviously is a turbo diesel. But the 200 DI refers to unbolting the T, which is the turbocharger, and running it normally aspirated. And the nice thing about that is that you have a block assembly which has been reinforced to handle the extra power of the turbo, but you're not putting that load on it, which means the rotating assembly lasts pretty much forever. I mean, it lasts as long as you could possibly think it could.
Well, what's the change in PSI then? Do you know?
It's not so much that, I don't know how to quantify that because, you're forcing air in under pressure versus atmospherically drawing it in. I don't think it actually changes your cylinder pressure prior to ignition that much. Post-ignition, your cylinder pressure is probably a good bit lower. I don't know the numbers on that exactly, but so you're putting less stress on all the rotating assembly. But the other thing you're not doing is you're not putting as much thermal load on the engine. Because diesel engines are very much about the heat, and when you pack the air in there, it gets warmer, and then when you squeeze it under compression, it gets really warm enough to ignite the fuel. So that heat all eventually has to get put somewhere, which means into the cooling system. But the turbo, because you're taking the heat energy from the exhaust stream and you're using it to compress the intake air, you're also preheating the intake air coming into the engine. So then you have to run it through an intercooler to try to bring it back down, but it's still warm air going into the engine, much warmer than what is atmospherically drawn in. So if you remove that hairdryer in front of your engine, if you will, and let it have cold ambient air, it's much less heat load on the engine, which means you can actually keep the stock series truck radiator on a 200 DI, and it will cool just fine.
Yep.
And the big limitation with a series truck is overheating anyway, no matter what you do with them. So this is kind of a nice added benefit to this particular conversion.
But didn't we add an electric fan to mine?
Well, you have to have a fan of some sort.
Okay, but so it was just being cooled normally.
Well, we're using the electric fan to replace the engine-driven fan that would have been there originally.
I see.
Now, there is still usually with the 200Di space for that fan, correct?
Yeah, the problem is if you're saving money by using the Disco variant of the 200 TDI, the fan is in the wrong place.
Exactly.
And ends up doing a bang-up job of cooling the crossmember on your frame.
Yeah, not so helpful.
And it's useful to point out at this point that when the 200 TDI was introduced, it came in two variants, one that fit the Disco and one that fit the Defender. And the difference was in where the belt-driven accessories on the front of the engine were located, and in the intake and exhaust manifolds and the location of the turbo. The Defender put the turbo way up high on top of the engine, and the exhaust manifold came out and up into the turbo, and then the air blew into the intake, which was located below the exhaust manifold. But that configuration was too tall to fit under the hood of the Disco, so they switched them, put the intake on top, put the exhaust underneath. But that puts the turbo very close to the frame on a series truck.
Right.
That doesn't sound
And probably
good.
in the way if you have left-hand drive of the steering column.
It's a real challenge to get the steering past it on a left-hand drive truck. On a right-hand drive truck, I'm told you can get away with it on an 88 if you shim the engine up a little bit. On a 109, it sits hard down on the frame before you get close to the engine mounts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you've got to do some serious work to make it fit in a 109.
Yep.
That said, that's the next project for the meat wagon.
Nice.
I'm going to make the turbo fit in a 109 because I can.
Yeah, it could use it. No, you could use the extra power too.
It could. I mean, although I got to say, just going from the 2.25 petrol to 200 Di, literally woke the truck up. It's not powerful. It's not fast now, but I can keep up on the highway. I can do 65 miles per hour, which is a full 20 more than I got before, and my fuel mileage went from 15 to 22.
Nice.
Yeah, I've seen this similar in the 109.
And you turn the key and it starts.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yep. And when you're on the trail and you're leaning over at a precarious angle, and the carburetor doesn't have any fuel in it because of the angles, you don't have that problem with a diesel. It'll start on its side if you turn the key.
Exactly.
And that for the listeners, that has in fact happened to Harold.
Oh yeah.
Yes. It wasn't. Yes.
I can speak from experience on
yes,
all this stuff.
Yes.
The petrol engine does not like to run well if it's not level.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot of other problems involved in terms of you have to have electricity to run the petrol engine. You need to make sure you don't get any of the electrical components wet. That's why the diesels have a higher waiting height than the petrols. So there are a whole lot of problems that are sort of solved by going to diesel.
Yeah, the TDI will run submerged.
Right.
Give it a snorkel for the intake and the exhaust. All it needs is fuel rotation. It does need a little bit of power to the one solenoid on the injection pump that turns the engine on or off.
Yep.
But if you can seal that up with a little bit of silicone, it's not sensitive wiring like ignition leads.
Right. Exactly. Doesn't have to be perfectly clean the entire time to run smoothly.
Right. And you'll never, ever have to adjust your spark plugs.
Right. Definitely.
What? Huh? What? I know why.
Yes, because real trucks don't have spark plugs.
So yeah, I actually have looked at the 200 Di option for mine as well. Mine, I have an 88, and it actually was imported from the UK with another somewhat common conversion, at least on that side of the pond. Mine has a Daihatsu 2.8 liter naturally aspirated diesel, and that's pretty much drop in. It's got plenty of room for the fan and everything. It's stock cooling. It could overpower my drivetrain, but not as likely in the naturally aspirated version.
Right. That is another advantage of the 200DI, to go back there for a moment, is that by reducing the power output, you're not going to break your transmission in a series truck.
Exactly.
You have about a hard limit of about 150 to 160 pound-feet of torque input on the series truck transmission, and at 180 pound-feet with the turbo spooled up, it's a little more than that transmission is good for, and it will shorten the life of your drivetrain. But if you take the turbo off, you understress the engine, you understress the transmission. It's just a nice way to go.
Yep. And I believe that the 200DI, that's very common. Yeah, I also like that one just because it's Land Rover, so you still get to deal with Land Rover parts.
It's an all Land Rover solution. It bolts in on the stock mounts. You have to move a couple studs in the flywheel housing, but otherwise the transmission bolts right to it. You use a series truck clutch, no adapters.
You can find all the parts on seriesparts.com.
Yeah, definitely. For most of the resellers, like Rovers North and all of them.
Did you like that shout-out? That was a little in-show shout-out.
Totally, I appreciate that.
Yeah, it went right over his head, John.
No, it did, actually.
You were just so low-key about that.
It was so subtle.
I'll downplay it a little bit. I think that the conversion kit that was used for my Daihatsu was produced by Conversion and Precision Engineering in the UK. They make a whole bunch of conversion options, which are common in the UK. Mm-hmm. There are some Nissan and Isuzu diesels that are fairly popular over there. These are all from the very small, I guess you would call them SUVs, like the Isuzu. What were the small ones? I know the Daihatsu is like the 4-track and the Rugger, but all those very small
was there
SUVs.
Like SX4? Was that one of them? Or am I thinking something? Suzuki
That's
SX4?
a Suzuki, not a Daihatsu.
Yeah, maybe like the Samurai or whatever.
Yeah.
Or whatever those very small ones were. Equivalent size-wise to about an 88 series. So, all that stuff drops in pretty well and has plenty of space under the hood, under the bonnet, or we should say.
Sounds like a good option if you can get the parts.
Right, and that's sort of the problem. I know a few people in the U.S. who have the Daihatsus, but it's really hard to get parts here.
Probably have your own little club going on.
Yeah. The 200DI is much easier to get the parts. Another fairly common diesel conversion are some of the Mercedes-Benz diesels.
Yep.
I know quite a few people who have done those. And obviously here on a lot of the small block Ford and Chevys are somewhat popular.
That gets ugly in a hurry, though, for a lot of the reasons we've already discussed.
Exactly, and we sort of touched on that on the transfer case side and the all of that.
Yeah,
There's a lot of math you have to start doing there, and
if you're going to step up to an American V8, then you really need to step up to re-engineering your entire drive lane.
Exactly.
Transmission. You can probably use the series truck transfer case. There's a lot of options to adapt it. Advanced Adapters makes a ton of stuff that adapts the series transfer case to virtually any good transmission you want to run. And the series truck transfer case is actually very robust. It's one of the strongest transfer cases you can buy.
Yep.
So,
but as you said, the gearbox is just not up for.
No, not even close.
Yeah.
So you're looking at a custom transmission, and then for all the reasons we discussed with Christian, you're doing a lot of work to make it all fit in the real estate.
Exactly.
Because there's no transmission out there that's going to hold any kind of torque and not be a lot longer than the series transmission.
Yep.
Especially when you start stacking up all the adapters.
Right. Definitely. Yeah, so there are quite a few options there. In addition to all that extra engineering, while it makes getting certain parts easier, it honestly tends to make it far more confusing because you've changed so much.
Yeah, I think some of that wild stuff, really, you do it for the bragging rights more than for the sensibility of it.
Yeah, and it's obviously a lot more expensive.
It can be. Especially if you're paying for somebody to do all it for you.
Right. If you're doing it yourself, a lot of them are just DIY conversions, and so it's not so bad.
If you have access to a good fab shop and a machine shop and you have the skills, yeah, that's one thing. But if you're hiring somebody, I think you want to keep it as simple as possible.
Yep.
And not only that, but if you're going to be traveling, you want it to be simple for service down the road by people who don't know what they're doing.
Exactly. And, that's why I kind of like the diesel options as well. They're fairly bulletproof anyway.
Plus, they're just a whole lot cooler.
They are.
Especially here in North America, because that's our preferred. It's different for us, as we've heard from our UK friends. Petrol's the interesting one for them.
Well, they want the V8 because it's an exclusive club for them.
Right.
Yep. And the conversion and precision engineering, they also even make Rover V8 conversion adapter sets. So you can even go that route if you want. But again, it's a lot more power. There's a reason the Stage 1 V8 and the FC101 went with a different drivetrain otherwise.
Well, the 101 needed it because they had a military contract they had to fulfill, and the military wanted more engine.
So yeah, I think that the diesel options are obviously pretty fun for us over here in the U.S. and they're very reliable and pretty easy in terms of straight drop-in conversions. I would highly suggest, as usual, Terry Ann Wakeman's expeditionlandrover.info website. She's got a lot of discussion on the engine conversions there.
She's an excellent resource on any kind of conversion you might want to do.
Honestly, any conversion, maintenance, anything. Right. You should probably start there. But yeah, having driven, my 88 with the diesel, I like it. It's much more reasonable.
I would concur, having driven my 109 with both petrol and diesel. Yes, the diesel is noticeably an excellent conversion.
Yep.
Can I tell my story of the first time I actually had to use the diesel, and I was actually going off to vacation in camp, and we hooked up the trailer, and hadn't driven the truck before, to be candid, with that conversion on it. Turned it on, let up on the clutch, and it started to pull the trailer right out of my driveway, and my driveway's at about a 45-degree incline.
Before you'd even found the skinny pedal.
I didn't even need to go close to the skinny pedal. And I was in two-wheel. It was, boom, let's go. And yes, highly recommend it.
Yes, very nice.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I think that covers engines.
Well, thanks very much.
At least in the series vehicles.
I mean, there's a lot of other things you could do. You could move a lot of Defender engines over if you wanted to. I mean, you could do the 2.5 petrol. You could do the 2.5 NA diesel, or, God forbid, the 2.5 TD. But worst engine they ever made. But in terms of the popular things, I think you've hit it.
Excellent.
And this is the Heritage segment, so that's basically what we're covering on the Heritage side of things.
And obviously, at this point, there are a lot more Heritage vehicles, but we can go over those later.
That's true. Right. Yeah, it's true. I guess, really, Range Rover Classic and Disco 1, Disco 2, Disco 3s, even, not 3s, but excuse me, Disco 1 and Disco 2.
Plus, the Defender has a lot of Heritage now, too.
It is Heritage. Well, it's the Heritage standard, is it not? I would purport.
Benchmark, if you will.
Benchmark. Oh, I like that much better.
But all of them that you can get in this country are by definition Heritage vehicles. So.
Absolutely.
That's our Heritage segment. Thanks very much, Morgan. Appreciate the work you do and the research you've done and getting that information to our listeners.
And thank you to Harold for filling in the gaps and providing additional technical details.
Talk is cheap, dude.
You get what you pay for.
That's right.
So that brings us to a close of the August edition of the Centresteer podcast. This has been number 29. I was thinking about that during the Heritage segment. This is we're coming up on 3 years of doing this on a monthly basis, and we've been very consistent. I'll pat ourselves on the back again, along with all the other pats we've had. We're coming up on 3 years. So that's
eventually we'll do it well.
And so that's the August edition. Coming up next week, I believe, I don't know if I have the date exactly correct, but Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II will surpass Her Majesty Queen Victoria as the longest-serving British monarch in the British system, the British monarchy system. And we just want to congratulate her on that. The reason we call that out, even though we're Americans, and we've spent 238 years, I believe, in having broken away from that system. She is a avid four-wheel drive Defender fan, and she drove and repaired a kind of heritage, even more heritage vehicle during World War II. While she was princess, she fixed ambulances and drove an ambulance during World War II. So we want to congratulate her on her long reign.
She's had the longest reign. Is she also the oldest sitting monarch?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
I guess Victoria would again probably be the only one that would be.
You mean so you're asking the oldest monarch, the oldest monarch, independent
Has she
of
attained the highest age whilst sitting upon the throne?
I don't know. Well, I think Morgan's looking that up. I will also mention that here in the Pittsburgh area, there's various Britsburgh events going on, which I thought was very interesting. The only thing I'm upset about, they've taken the Union Jack, by the way, and made it black and gold. So you have the black and gold Union Jack signaling Brit. But,
yeah, we needed that.
Well, but there's actually a legitimate good connection to that. Do you know why?
I'm sure you're going to tell me.
I'm going to tell you. Pittsburgh was named after William Pitt the Elder, who while he was Prime Minister, I think he was Secretary of State for something at the time when they named Pittsburgh.
Correct.
And he was the Earl of Chatham.
Right.
And which you may know, as those maybe not in this area know, we have a university, Chatham University. It's Chatham.
Kind of a name around here.
It is a name. And but on his crest, his colors were black and gold.
All right.
And that got transferred over to Pittsburgh, black and gold. And then eventually the major sports teams here have picked up on black and gold. And I think Pittsburgh is actually the only sport team in the United States where all of its major teams are the same color, black and gold. And so there's actually a legitimate connection with making the Union Jack black and gold because it goes back to William Pitt.
And you and I are the only humans in this area that understand that.
In addition to all the other Britsburgh people that are out there, there's a British gentleman who runs the Britsburgh thing, all the different events going on. I'm going to try to go next Saturday to Bushy Run Battlefield. They're having a pie contest or a pie eating sampling, which I was hoping the 109 would be available for. As a side note, just to roll that puppy into.
We'll talk.
We'll talk. Roll that into Bushy Run Battlefield. Bushy Run Battlefield was part of the pre-revolutionary era events.
Pontiac's Rebellion.
Pontiac's Rebellion, or was it French and Indian?
It was Pontiac's Rebellion.
So that was all during the British reign, and when the British reign
immediately post the French and Indian, a.k.a. the 7 Years' War.
Right, the Great War for Empire.
Right, it was an Indian uprising, which was sort of the fallout of the
from that. Right. From the French and Indian War.
The French were done fighting, but the Indians not so much.
Well, that's probably because the British kind of probably
we weren't
lied.
done picking on them.
Yeah, they probably lied to some people.
Well, yeah.
So, anyways, there's a number of events going on, and I'll have a link to some of those events just because I think it's cool and interesting if you're in the Pittsburgh area or you want to know about what's happening. There's no car show. That was my only upset.
Yeah, that's just wrong.
Yeah, I know. Well, the British cars here should have been a perfect time.
That's too bad.
Yes.
Fortunately, September is British Invasion in Stowe, Vermont. So,
are you going?
I'm going. Yeah.
Excellent. We'll need a field report.
Totally.
Yeah, do it. Let's seriously do a legit field report.
Take your little thingy and record it while you're there.
I can probably do that.
What British car are you driving?
No British car.
I had to do it. I couldn't let that go. So.
I'll try to at least grab a part out of my Land Rover and carry it in my pocket or something.
Just spill some oil.
Yeah.
Actually, if you could hand out podcast cards, that would be appreciated.
I can definitely do that. I might need to replenish my supply.
Yeah, let's talk.
Yep. And so there is news on Queen Elizabeth. She is the oldest, at least of the British monarchs.
So she's not only she will be the oldest monarch to be on the throne, but she's also the longest reigning monarch.
Right, exactly. So Victoria only lived to 81 years old, and Elizabeth II is already 89.
Well, I was thinking that due to the increased life expectancy in modern times that might be the case, but just wanted to confirm.
Yep.
Yeah.
And on that bombshell, that is the end of the 29th edition of the Centresteer podcast. Thanks very much, everybody, for listening. If you have any comments, questions, ideas, please send them in, as Christian did, from our website to our email address, and we'll do our best to get in touch with you. Have a good month, everybody, and we'll talk to you very soon. The Centresteer theme song, Sunset Rider by the Tritons, is available from Nivio's Music Alley. Check it out at music.nivio.com. Make our listeners cry. The guy that reached out to us, he wanted to listen to the podcast and get answers, and you're making him cry.
Right into our show. We'll run you off.